everybody. We've still got a couple minutes. We'll let people mosey in if they had a later or a later dinner, a really late breakfast. Anyway, while you're all here, as you know, forever, programming has been a big part of what we do here at Brooks Memorial Library, except not lately. But we are embarking on a new strategic plan. The trustees are gathering information to decide the course of the library over the next several years. So we do have an online survey that people can take, and I have little pieces of paper here that will give you the link, or you can just go to our website and take it, or we will have some paper copies available for you as well if you prefer to write your answers down. So don't forget to let us know what you think, as if that's ever a problem in Brattleboro. So welcome everyone. I'm so happy to see all your beautiful faces that I'm sure are smiling behind your masks tonight. And I'm especially delighted to introduce this program because 6 years ago, when I started here, the very first big public program we had here was with Ken Bloss. I don't know whether you remember that.
I didn't remember whether it was 6 or 8 or whatever, but I remember.
Right, so that was the very first time I really put together and presented a program. So how fitting that tonight, in this new era of programming at Brooks Memorial Library, we have Ken back. And you may recognize Ken from his appearances on the Antiques Roadshow. You may have moseyed into his bookshop in Boston in the downtown Crossing area, the Brattle Bookshop. But tonight, we get to hear the stories behind books. And really, what is it that brings us to books but the stories? And what brings us back but the stories? So tonight, we get to revel in the stories of a true lover of books. And after his presentation and his stories, Ken will answer questions and also take a look at any books you might have brought along with you. So sit back and enjoy.
Thank you. What I do in the talk will last about 45 minutes to an hour. The first half hour, I'll give some of my background, history of the store. I'll talk about some of the collections I have, some of the places I've been, tell stories, anecdotes, whatever about books. If you like the stories, I do a podcast. There are about 100-something episodes, 20 minutes long. And then what I like to do for the last 10 or 15 minutes of the talk is question and answer. Because I can go on and on and on and on about old books. And at least with question and answer, I can go on about what you want to listen to. The last minute or two of the talk, I'll tell one or two stories more. And then when I end the talk, I'm more than happy to stay. I'll answer any and all questions. I'll do all the appraisals. I'll just do them much more informally, quick, with no order whatsoever, because I find the more order you put in, the longer it takes. And then I also like to get home. So on. In any case, let me give you a little bit of the background and history of the store. The history of the Brattle Bookshop goes back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My parents were getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. It's never been in Brattleboro. It's never been in Cambridge. There used to be a small street in what was the Scully Square area of Boston called Brattle Street. The street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is now. And my father built the store with his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge, and he was a bit of a character and a showman. And every time he would move, and we've had 7 different locations, mainly due to urban renewal, he would run sales, half price, $1.50, quarter dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell, people go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave, the next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, and we were moving from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall to West Street, where we are now. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman, and at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. So we hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team, and on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They filled it up with books, and they drove it from the end of Washington Street, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, back down Washington, with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend, told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And when we first moved into West Street in 1969, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire. It literally burned to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. But we wanted to keep going, not go out of business, continue. We found a storefront a few doors up the street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And even though it was a meager stock, within a month we reopened. The main thing was just keep going. The next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is, again, a few doors down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, so on. And that type of business, the large, old, general, secondhand bookstore, especially in the inner cities, is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, read books, sell books, but particularly in the inner cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have been going out of business. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s, so I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their mid-30s. I don't think they have interest in coming into it. And I've done this literally just about all my life. My parents say my first word was book. I have no idea, but I'm sure they were talking about books all the time. Maybe it was. Then I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summers during college. I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now is almost 50 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a lab somewhere. And a lot of the fun is the people who come in, the places you go, the characters. As a matter of fact, talking about characters, it's sometimes even the people who work for you. A number of years ago, and this was probably in the mid-70s, I hired a man. He's a nice guy, but the first week he was working there, I had a man who was older, probably younger than I am now, but he was an old man at the time, the way I looked at it. And he asked if we had any books by an author named Doniford Yates. And I knew who Doniford Yates was, a somewhat obscure novelist. We went to the section where it would be. Look, there weren't any. I said to him, "Do you want to leave your name?" He said, "No, I'll check again." He leaves, and my new assistant, who literally had only been working a few days, goes, "Does that man come in here often?" And I said, I wasn't paying that much attention, but no, I didn't recognize him. Oh, he goes, "Oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter." So you never know. And one of the best or the most memorable introductions that I've ever had was a month later, same employee. We had 4 tickets. My wife had, for 10 years, worked for the Celtics. She likes to term it She worked for the local professional Boston basketball team. And if people couldn't figure out it was the Celtics, well, they wouldn't. Anyways, we had 4 tickets. I said, Hugh, do you want to go to the game? He said, yeah, but give me a few tickets. Give me the tickets. We'll meet you there. My wife and I get there. He's sitting there with a woman. And this is the introduction. I'd like you to meet my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? So sometimes it's the employees, and it's the people, the characters, and going out to houses and estates. You never know what you're going to see, who you're going to meet, the people, the characters. And I'll relate a few of those stories to you. And matter of fact, just coming up here, someone who couldn't come to the talk, they had a set of Audubon they wanted me to look at, which was sort of fun to look at before I came here. But going out to houses and estates is how we get most of our books. And it's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island, never knowing who you're going to meet, what you're going to see, the people, the places, characters. So let me give you a few of them. This was a while ago. I was out of the store. I got back. There was a message that a Mrs. Fisher had called, and she had some books. I called her up, and she said, oh, yes, my father died in Providence. He has 500 art reference books. We want to get the best price we can. We're inviting a number of dealers down. Would you be interested? Well, Providence is only an hour from Boston. We go all over the Northeast, sometimes further than that, so an hour is nothing. They lived in an old street called Benefit Street up near Brown University. I got to the house. It was a large old colonial. I got led through the house, into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthiest families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted. I was happy, she was happy, and she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university, some are being sold at auction, but would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport is one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the basement to the attic, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't touch this. It was fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, when I come to groups like this, I do hundreds of free appraisals. As a matter of fact, my goal is that whenever you think of an old book, you think of me and the Brattleboro Bookshop. I don't care if you think of 10 others, just as long as we're one of them. And one of the ways I feel I can do that is by giving out as much free information as reasonable. There are times when we charge for very detailed written appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, whatever, but in any case. Another mansion in Newport. It was smaller than the Browns, but it was still a mansion. This was the Perry family. Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry, and what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships, and they were fascinating to read through. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, at the bottom of the page was a tiny entry, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain, so it's a little different nowadays. When my father was still alive, and he died over 30 years ago, we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but it sounded like there might be a few things, and it was relatively close by. We got to her house. It was a little ranch house. Paint was peeling, weeds were growing, and you say, oh, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there are just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. It turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, And she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe, all the court intrigues, all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And then on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors. They were sort of like this, pastoral European scenes. And when I first saw them, I thought they were nice. And the more I looked at them, the more she talked, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors are nice. And she turned around and said, oh yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner, probably $1 million worth of painting. It was like, oh yes. So you never know what you're going to see, who the people are, what their stories are, and characters. And another character about, now this is getting to be a while ago, 15, 20 years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? He said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Now, obviously, he was much younger at the time. He said he was really looking forward to this dinner and all the learning and insight that he was going to get from these people. And he said he was excited. He got to the table a little early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing, sat down opposite. And this man said, the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, my Tom, you look very good. And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, it's the Carter's little liver pills. This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on and on with these stories, but I'll tell some others too. But one last one. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store, people wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How else did you get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. Most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of my head. Some are a little more involved, and occasionally you really have to do some research, but that can be fun. But every once in a while you get a call that really stands out. And again, a while ago, I answered the phone, hello, Brattle Bookshop, can I help you? Lady, elderly, thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, President Kennedy slept with me. Now, you have to admit that gets your attention, and stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family, and when he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value. Handwritten letters, particularly from later 20th century presidents, are particularly rare and valuable. She wanted to get an offer on them. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. Went to her house, great stories, a lot of fun. The letters were great. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer for them, much as I suspected, though. There was no way she could sell these letters. They were part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong, but maybe someday, who knows. One of the things said in the introduction is that I praise for Antiques Roadshow. I hope some of you watch it, because the more the ratings are up there, the more they season the season. And matter of fact, we just 2 weeks ago, I was in Nashville, and it's the first time in 3 years or 2.5 years they've actually had an Antiques Roadshow where they've had crowds of people coming, bringing things. This is for next year's shows. In a few weeks, I'm going to Santa Fe, and there's one up in Vermont, up near Burlington. But the Antique Roadshow is a lot of fun. First of all, they do it all over the country, and anywhere in this country you go, The people are wonderful, it's beautiful if you have any extra time. Don't talk about politics and religion. That probably keeps everybody on an even keel. But why would I ever go to Boise, or go to Omaha, or go to Fargo? But anywhere, it's fun. And the way that show works, for those of you who watch it, usually there's a day, you're at either a convention center or a museum or whatever, and you start appraising at about 7 in the morning, and you sometimes praise till 6, 7 at night. There are 3,000 to 5,000 people who come to a show. Each person has 2 items. So 6,000 to 10,000 items come in. They tape around 100 plus items, which makes up 3 hours of television. Now, one of the things that people don't realize about it is the appraisers get paid nothing. Not only don't we get paid, we don't get airfare, we don't get hotels, we don't get meals. It's public television. But what we do get is a lot of sociability and public relations and fun. And one of the things, too, from an appraiser's point of view at the show, there's no guarantee that we're going to get on TV. Someone has to bring something in that's not only that they don't know everything there is to know about it, but that's also interesting. So you can appraise all day long and have spent the money to get there and not get on TV. And so what happens is at 7 in the morning, 7:30, they start letting people in. There are 3 book appraisers sitting next to the jewelry, next to posters, next to music, and so on. And the ideal day for an appraiser on the Antiques Roadshow is someone comes in at about 8 in the morning, they have something really interesting, really good. You call a producer over, they talk to the person, they talk to you, they go tape it. By 9 o'clock in the morning, you've taped something. Makes the rest of the day go really easy. Whereas if you haven't taped something, when it gets to 4 or 5 in the afternoon, it gets really tense. Well, there was one city that I was doing, it was Kansas City, I remember, and this man comes in, and he has a few things signed by Pope John Paul. They were nice, but not great. But then he pulls out some photographs, and it started getting really interesting. He was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country. And he started telling stories about what was going on behind the scenes with the Pope and his entourage and all of the procession that goes with it, and which was really interesting. And then he pulls out a picture. And usually when you see a picture of someone with the Pope is in all his vestments. He's standing there very formally, his hands out, someone's kneeling, kissing his ring, and it's a very formal procedure. This picture is the pilot sitting in his pilot's chair. The Pope has all his vestments on. They must have been just about, and the Pope is reaching over with one leg in the air, reaching over the pilot's seat and signing his Bible. And I'm going, this is great. And I said to the man, let me see the Bible. He goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go home and get it? And he said, well, no, it's in a safe deposit box and it's Saturday and the bank's closed. And I'm going, ah. Later on, someone brought something in. I did tape, but it was like, ah. And another story about the Antiques Roadshow, for a couple of years, my wife did it. She didn't enjoy it as much. I don't mind sitting there for 12 hours, seeing people, appraising and all that. She didn't care about it. But whenever you come to groups like this, or in the store when people are calling up and you're appraising, no matter how much you try, you can't make everybody happy. And at the Antiques Roadshow in particular, they actually have a meeting and they tell you to be nice. And you have to realize from an appraiser's point of view, you know, you're there 10 hours, 11 hours, some people get tired and a little cranky. But the people who are coming, they had to get the tickets by lottery, they won it. A lot of times they still have to wait in line for a while. Although, quite honestly, I think waiting in line is the most fun because the guests talk to each other about what they are. But as an appraiser, you can look down that line and probably most will go chunk, 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 chunk. You know, you can almost see, but you don't do that. You stand there behind the table and people bring things in and you either touch it or look at it and spend a little time and talk to the people, and even if you learn ways to say it's not valued. Some of you, if you brought books, you'll see what I mean. But there was one time my wife was appraising, and this is how, no matter what you do, you can't make everybody happy. A lady comes in and she has a book and she says, "This book is signed by A. Lincoln." And my wife looks at it and looks at it, and it takes a little time. And she goes, "It is signed by A. Lincoln, but not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be." And the lady goes, "How can you tell?" And my wife, very nicely, she opens the book and turns to the title page. She says, "Well, the first clue is this book was printed in 1915. And the lady goes, "So?" And my wife goes, "Well, when I went to school, I learned that he was assassinated in 1865. Slams the book shut and goes, "You don't know what you're talking about," and storms off unhappy. You know, that's an extreme, but a lot of times, even being a professional at appraising, you see something, you see an autograph, you see a book, and you want it to be what you want it to be so badly that you can almost convince yourself that it is what you want it to be. And a lot of times when I've looked at items like that, I've called in other dealers, not said anything to them or sent them pictures and said, "Can you look at this?" Because, and occasionally, you feel like maybe you've talked yourself into it. And so it's good to get a second opinion. And most of the time I'm right, but every once in a while, you need that call to earth. There are a lot of things that come up. Now, people sometimes ask me, do I collect things? Do I collect books? And really the answer to that is no. And the reason the answer for that is no is when I was growing up, my father had the store. He would bring home 4 or 5 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years. And you can imagine what our house looks like. And he always meant to either read a chapter or look at a picture, look at the introduction, read something, but he didn't. So growing up like that, what I do is I read a lot. I read a lot about books, book collecting. I read books on New England and Boston history. I read Stephen King, and there's a John Grisham book I'll mention in particular. But I tend to read them and then bring them back to the store. Now, my wife had a collection of about 1,000 books on jazz and signed photographs of jazz musicians. We downsized recently, 3 or 4 years ago, and she decided that if anyone was interested, she might sell it because she was afraid that a lot of the musicians she collected, 10 years from now, people won't know who they were. Actually, we had a customer come in, was very interested. She sold it in block. She was thrilled and was happy and sold the pictures too. And she had some great ones. But it was time. Then I there was one collection that started off as a bit of a joke. There were a lot of books before dust jackets came out. They had a lot of decorative covers. And the reason they had decorative covers was that the publisher figured if your book caught your eye in a bookstore, more chance you'd buy it. And there are people who collect books like this just for the decorative covers. You can go to library sales, bookstores, antique stores, and so on. And large numbers of these you can pick up very cheaply. There are some that are very expensive, but you can pick up a lot cheaply. And individually, they don't seem like much. But graphically, decoratively, as a collection, they can be very nice. And one day I got a book. It had a picture of a toilet on the cover. And the title of the book was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper, who invented the toilet. I brought it home, I showed it to my wife, she took one look at it and said, "We have to put that in the bathroom." A few days later, I got another book that had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but with a big eye staring at you. I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now this is a little half bathroom, so no shower, no steam, Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and now there are 300 or 400 of these Victorian-style illustrated books. People walk in the bathroom, they're a little taken aback, loads and loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book falls off the shelf. You can imagine where it ends up. Now, one of the things I definitely do collect, I don't have it here with me, but I have about 20 or 30 sheets of paper, single space, with either one word, sometimes a sentence, but more likely just a phrase. And every one of those words, phrases, sentences is a story. And I could literally do a lecture by putting them up on a wall and taking a dot, throwing it at it, and then say, oh, okay, I'll tell that story, or I'll tell that one, or that one. And I'll tell a few of those. One of the things that I did mention about, and I won't give the total punchline to this, but John Grisham, he came out with a book a few years ago called Kamino Island. I don't know if any of you read it, but it's about book thefts and so on, and stealing Fitzgerald items from Princeton. In any case, there's a section of the book that, if you read it, you'll get the idea. But I ended up talking to him about that book, and we sort of ended up saying that he owes me a dinner. I haven't collected the dinner yet, but someday, even if I'm in Charlotte, in Charlotte, Virginia, I'm going to go and walk in a store, knock on a store, and say, "You owe me a dinner." And but read the book, you'll get the idea. It involves book thefts and fences and whatever. But some of the things that happen, now this has just come up a few times. Matter of fact, there was an appointment tomorrow that someone called up and said they postponed. And when you go out to houses, we go out almost every day, going out to either a few books or a large collection or thousands of books, and you never know what you're going to see. I mean, we got a call a year or so ago. A man said his cousin died, he had 500 books. Sports books and travel books, would we be interested? He was marginally interested. We said, sure, we'll go out and look. 20,000 books in that house. I mean, how you can go from 400 to 20,000. I understand if you go from 1,000 to a couple of hundred, or a couple of hundred to 1,000, but 20,000 books. And one of the things also about this type of business, people think you sit there and you read books or talk about books. You buy 1,000 books in a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. You better carry 1,000 books out of a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. As a matter of fact, a job interview for our store is, someone comes in, they're applying, do you have any old sporting injuries, knee injuries, back injuries, any neck injuries, anything that would prevent you from lifting heavy boxes? Do you have any allergies to dust, mold, mildew? We go through all of that, and then we go, well, where did you go to school? What's your background? But if you can't get through the first part, it's an incredibly physical job. But in any case, someone postponed an appointment tomorrow. I was supposed to go look at 1,000 books. And sometimes that can be frustrating, just because you've sort of blocked out the time. I could have scheduled something else if I knew about it. But a lot of times I think this lady actually is in the hospital. It's a very good reason. And most of the time, the reasons that people postpone are perfectly understandable. But there are times when it gets a little ridiculous. And we had a good customer of ours. He was had some of his books in a storage area in Somerville. It was a very good storage area. It had electricity in it and all of that. And he called up, would you come out? We said, rush, sure, no problem. Postponed, rescheduled, postponed, rescheduled, postponed. This went on 4 times. The 5th time I said, Russ, if you postpone this again, we're just not coming. What happens on the morning we're supposed to go out for the 5th time? He calls up, he goes, I have to postpone, but it's not my fault, it's not my fault. He goes, it's not. And he explained what happened is in the storage area, there was a lady who had the storage area next to him. Her husband had run out on her 30 years ago. He was an abusive alcoholic, and she had a storage area there. And it turned out she was on her deathbed the day before, and her daughter was there. And she told her daughter, go to the storage area. In my storage area, there's a freezer. In the freezer, you'll find your father. It turned out that she had murdered him 30 years before, got a freezer, it had electricity, and for 30 years, he had been in the freezer. Now, nobody even thought to look for him because he was such an abusive alcoholic, everybody felt that he had run out. And it was on the news that night, so it got confirmed. So I said, Ross, okay, that's a good excuse. I'll go along with that one. And so, again, that's sort of the fun part. And you never know who's going to be coming in, who the people are. My father had a man who, when he was going to Harvard Business School, but he used to come in, and when I started, again, in 1973, he would come in. And now, my wife likes to say, I only work a half a day now. I get in at 5:30, the store closes at 5:30, 12 hours, it's only half a day. And when I'm here, it's even a longer day. But I've always gotten in early, and this man knew that I got in early. And he worked for a vice president of a bank in North Carolina. And no offense to anyone if you're a banker, there are lots of vice presidents in banks. In any case, he would call me up once in a while and he'd say, look, I have to go to New York, but at that time you could just get on the shuttle to Boston. He says, I can get to Boston at 7. There's a chance maybe I could come in, and then there's a 9 o'clock flight to Charlotte. And I always said, no, he was a wonderful man and fun to say. And then over the years, he was an executive vice president, a senior vice president. His bank merged with another bank, and then he was president of Bank of America. And he would still call me up and say, can I come in early in the morning when he was, and you know, yeah, you can come in, you're the president of Bank of America. But he unfortunately got sick and died younger than he should have. But so you know, here's this college student that was Bank of America and still liked coming into the store. And so again, it's sort of the people, the place, and sometimes some of the more unusual things can happen. And pretty soon I'm going to open up this question because I can go on and on. I end the talk with a couple of stories. And I also talk about sometimes the most valuable books. Now, I've sometimes run into some really unusual and valuable things just before some of the things that I've appraised for insurance for museums. I one time got called by a museum. See, I'm even going off track from the unusual story I was going to say. I'll say that one too. But I got called by a museum. They were loaning a document to another museum. They just needed an insurance appraisal. And I was a member, and I said, no problem. Matter of fact, I'll do it for free, but I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want the original. I want to see it. They said, fine, just come in. You can see it. I'm holding it. A 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. I mean, the fact that something like that exists, and he went on in detail. So I'm sitting there holding that. I mean, I deal with autographs, manuscripts, presidential things, but if you're holding something of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Edison, Albert, it's still, you're touching something they touched and thought about and put their thought, it still sends a tingle up your spine. Another time, I got called to a house just north of Boston called Dracut, just on the Merrimack River. The house was a World War II ranch house. It looks like it was furnished once, never been furnished again. They had a few nice books. There was a younger man. On the table in the kitchen, a Formica table, they had this big roll, a teletype roll of paper. And I looked at it. It was the manuscript for On the Road, the original manuscript. I got to pick it up, I got to touch it, I unrolled it a foot or two, it was too fragile. Turned out the young man I was talking to was his nephew. But I mean, I got to touch it. They ended up selling it later for $2.5 million about 30 years ago at auction, but I got to touch it. Another item, I got called to do an appraisal, and like I said, my degree's in chemistry at a university in the Boston area. First edition of Newton's Principia Mathematica. That in and of itself is in the $1 million range. But this was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margins. I got to touch it, hold it. Now, that went from the college, Babson College in Wellesley, to MIT, out to the Huntington Library in Pasadena. Before COVID, one of the last things, we were at a book show in Pasadena. My wife and I went to the Huntington Library, went to the case where that book was, saw it sitting there, and I'm going, I touched that book. So, in any case, unusual circumstances. I got called, it was a suburb of Boston, but it was a much more wooded area. I was looking at books, and it was around noon. And all of a sudden, the back doorbell starts ringing on the back porch, which leads out into the woods. And, it's ringing and ringing, and I look up, and there's a group of raccoons there ringing the doorbell. It turns out the lady who owned the house used to feed them lunch. And they literally learned to ring the doorbell when they were there. So, admittedly, this didn't have anything to do with the books, but it's like, you run into unusual things. Why don't, at this point, why don't I open it up to questions, because I could go on and on forever. And quite honestly, anything you ask me, I can go off on a tangent. And if you don't have any, I can keep going with stories. But anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
I'll repeat the question. Probably easier.
Not that I have any of them, but I'm just curious. You know the paperbacks that they used to give to the GIs in
Yeah.
World War II? Have those survived? Are those out there? What became of?
The question is, there was a group of paperbacks that they used to, during World War II, send out to the GIs, to the soldiers. And actually, they were immensely popular. They were actually oblong in shape. They were not as thick as this, but they were more in this shape. And a lot of the more popular classics, but also the popular stories of the time, they were called military editions. And they do show up, and they are collectible. Some more than others, some they sold, but they were sized so they could fit in their pockets. And a lot of war, you think of the intense fighting, but a lot of war is boring. In other words, they're often in South Sea Island or in Europe, and there's nothing to do. So these books were a very, very valuable thing sent to them. And they were read, they were saved, they were brought home, and they do show up, and there are people who collect them. There are books written about them. Most of them are in the few dollar range. There are some of them that run into the hundreds of dollars. But yeah, they're accessible. You can get them. They're fun, and you can get books about them. I saw you.
Yeah.
Wonderful stories. Are there occasions when you go to someone's house and say that the person wants to sell you something that you say is so valuable that it should be in a museum?
The question is, when I go out to a house, do I see something that I think is so valuable it should be in a museum? And do I say it should be in the museum? Well, that happens more often than not when something's not valuable. In other words, you can have, let's say you have a wonderful 19th century journal of life in Brattleboro. That probably belongs here. It probably is not tremendously valuable because there are a lot of journals or books of that type. So you're not talking thousands of dollars or millions. On the other hand, there are times when we make our living buying and selling. So we'll buy something, sell it to a library, museum, whatever, work out a deal between everybody. And then there are some book dealers who just specialize in that. There are a few book dealers who specialize in selling authors, scientists, their personal papers to different libraries, and so it's all, it depends on what it is, who it is, what type of material, how in-depth it is. And some of it, you're not quite sure where it ends up, but you feel like it should end up in a library. We just bought a very nice journal. It was a girl, she was 16 years old. They were leaving Russia to get out because she was Jewish, and the revolution was coming. There was a lot of unease. And the journal went from Moscow to St. Petersburg, Trans-Siberian Railroad to Vladivostok, to Japan, to Hawaii, to San Francisco, to Boston. And it turns out it was in Russian, but one of my employees reads Russian. But the other interesting part about this was she went to Heifetz's, Josh Heifetz's bar mitzvah. And she has all sorts of signed pictures, and he made the same trip relatively soon after, and the family always stayed friends. So you not only had the music and interest, but the idea, and they had pictures in Japan of the family. That belongs in a museum somewhere. We bought the journals, but we'll find someplace appropriate that will fit in with it. So that's, yes.
I have a book called Benjamin Walker's, and I want to find out the best thing to do with this particular book. It's a first edition Isaiah Thomas 1791 Quarto Bible. It has a leather binding over its original binding with the gold.
Well, I'll tell you, on specific books, I'll do that more at the end.
Well, that'd
sort
be
of.
good. Yeah, that'd be great.
But a lot of times, and I end the story talking about Bibles to some degree. One of the things, though, with Bibles, in a lot of historical societies or libraries nowadays, they don't put a lot of value on whose Bible it is, unless it's annotated, detailed. I had a historical society turn down Paul Revere's Bible because it was just Paul Revere's Bible. I mean, not to in any way put down Paul Revere, but they take up a lot of room, they're big. They suggested donating it to the Paul Revere House, where they actually could put it on display and people would look at it. But for this society, if they started taking in every famous person's Bible that's offered to them, it would take up huge, and it has almost no historical value. And sometimes they have births, deaths, marriages, but they just sometimes want to just photocopy, take a digital photo. But I'll look, I'll see, and I'll explain it. And again, I end my talk talking about Bibles a little. In the back there?
What effect has, in the last 30 or so years, the internet had on three-dimensional books?
The question is, what effect has the internet, computers, and all that had on books? It's huge. I mean, I could do hours and hours, but I assure everybody here, I'm not going to talk hours and hours about that. But it's had effects in many different ways. First of all, e-books, they're good. I don't like them as much. My big issue with e-books, well, the big advantage is you can carry 1,000 books or more with you very easily. But my big issue with them reading for pleasure is a lot of times at night when I'm reading and you start to realize that you've read the same paragraph 2 or 3 times, you want to see how many pages to the end of the chapter. That's actually not that easy to do with e-books and get back. So I tend to like the books themselves in any case. But one of the big effects that the computers have had in online, as far as used and rare books and buying and selling, 20 years ago, a lot of, quote, rare books, you would go in, you'd buy, you'd pay the price for them. Maybe there was a book that you needed for research, but you knew you didn't need it then, but you knew when you did need it, they'd be hard to find. And maybe the book was higher than you wanted to pay, but you go, I've got to buy this because when I want it, I need it there. You know, the picture of the sort of professorial person in their library with walls of books around them. Well, first of all, that was so they could pull this book off the shelf and find that data. Who's bought a dictionary lately or bought an encyclopedia? You don't need them. Books that you just bought for reference entirely because you just wanted the information. A lot of those books people don't buy anymore. And it goes beyond what you might think. A lot of these big, beautiful art books that 20 years ago sold for hundreds of dollars even, now are down to nothing because if you want to see a picture of Picasso, of almost any artist in the world, if you've got a nice computer screen, you can Google it, it comes up and the information is sometimes even better and the color sometimes is even better. But it goes beyond that even. I had a friend who retired and he decided that he came in the store and he said, you know, I want to take up tennis again. Do you have any books on how to play tennis? We looked, there were a couple, he goes, you know, actually YouTube's better. You can actually see. So all those how-to, how to knit, how to fix cars, how to repair, you don't need those books anymore. But on the rare books, books that were, quote, rare 20 years ago, they actually were hard to get, not rare necessarily. And what would happen is, you know, because they were hard to get, you pay a price. Now you look for that same book and you go click, click, and 100 copies show up, priced from $5 to whatever price. And what's happened is if they're all about the same, it brings the price down to the lowest common denominator. Because why? You know, a lot of people say, well, I saw it online, it was $50, $75, and $100. So 75 is a fair price. And I go, no. If you're buying it and the book at 50 is the same, it's whatever the lowest price one. Now, if there's differences, fine. But so that's brought prices down on tremendous amounts of, quote, what used to be rare but just were hard to get, because now they're easy to get. Also, that professor or person interested in buying the book because they need it, they go click, click, they see 30 copies online, they go, I'll buy it when I need it, which means they usually never buy it. So it's had that effect, the knowledge is there, but it's a sort of two-edged sword because it's absolutely wonderful that that knowledge is out there, free, accessible, easy to get for the whole world. It's amazing. I have a daughter who lives in Africa, and the fact that you can access all this information easily, quickly, and freely for the people there, for her, it's fabulous. It's not great for used and rare book dealers in some cases, but you adjust it. Things are always changing. The computer is a tool, the online is a tool. Those who know how to use the tool well, it works. But so and I could go on and on and on of what type of, so a lot of things it's brought the price down. If any of you use the online to check for books or check for rare books or whatever, the first thing I tell people to look for is not the price, look at how many. Because once you get past a couple, if there are 100 books online of that book, it means there's 100 online that haven't sold. So look at how many first, then start looking at price. And if there's only one or none or whatever, that's a good indication. I'll tell you what, why don't I take one more question, I'll take yours, and then I'll tell two more stories, and then I'll end and do appraisals.
What you do for families with books, I do for families with old firearms. What I'd like to know is, in the last 50 years, has your cost of helping those families gone up, gone down, or stayed the same?
You mean when people want to sell books, or?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, there
does it cost you more now to deal with the books than it did 50 years ago?
Well, I mean, does it cost more now than it did 50 years ago? Well, in absolute numbers,
Yes, I know,
absolutely.
but I mean, percent.
So that's yes. But the question is, when you're dealing with someone who has books, either wanting to buy them, and we many times selling books, one thing that actually the internet and electronics is made much cheaper, is if someone calls us up, in the past, we sort of had to say, well, what do you have? Well, the first question we asked, how many books do you have? The first answer was a lot. The second question we'd ask is, well, what kind of books do you have? And the first answer to that was fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. So you try to say, try to get it, well, is there any particular area, subject, field, whatever. Nowadays, one of the first things we tell people, assuming they're capable, is take a picture of the shelf. I mean, you can get sometimes 2 or 3 shelves in one picture, which can be 50 or 100 books. And if they're in focus and we can see the shelves, it's a really, really fast way for us to get a sense. So it saves us going out to a lot of deals that we probably shouldn't go out to. So that saves us time. On the other hand, cost of everything has gone up, so it can be more expensive, but that's all taken into consideration. A lot of times people will say to me, I'll go out and I'll say, well, we'll pay X for that. And they'll say, well, we saw those books on, that's $10, that's 10, that's 15, that's 20, that's whatever. And I say to them, that's great. If you've got 1,000 books, put them online, describe them, sell them, take the money, get the pictures taken, go to the post office, wrap them up, and do all of that. And what I say is, look, if we're paying someone $20 an hour plus health insurance, if it takes them a half an hour to list a $10 book, we're losing money. So in that sense, in rent, well, we own the building, but taxes are high. So the overall cost of doing business is higher, and even though those costs were always there, many of them are higher than they used to be. So, that all gets figured in and you make a deal. Matter of fact, a lot of times when we're looking at books, if they're not, if you have really rare books, before I came here, I went out in person at a set of Audubon. That's a lot of money. But a lot of times when we go out to a house and we look at books and we come up hopefully with fair offers. I mean, probably 90% of what we offer gets accepted. The first question isn't, gee, do you think you could maybe the first question is, are you going to take everything? And if you say yes to that, it's a done deal. If you start saying, well, no, I'm actually going to pick and choose, that's the quickest way to lose a deal. In matter of fact, have been a few occasions where we've said, well, look, we'll pay you a couple of $1,000s to pick, we'll pay you $1,000 to take everything, because it's just a huge amount of work. So the cost that's involved can be, it's all, when you make an offer, it's all figured in. And depending on the type of books, what you're looking for, the work that goes into it, how much time and effort you have to put in selling it. And also, if you sell me, let's get to the more expensive. If I buy a book, a $10,000 book, that I know I can sell tomorrow, I might pay $8,000 or $9,000 for it because I know I could get on the phone, sell it to somebody, make $1,000 or $2,000. That's quick and easy. That same $10,000 book, if I know there's a good chance that 2 years later you can come and visit it and still have it, I might be reluctant to pay $2,000 or $3,000 for it. It's still a $10,000 book when that right person comes in, but the time and effort that goes into selling it can be an issue. On autographs and manuscripts and letters, if you're selling a manuscript or someone's diary, the time that goes into reading the diary can make a difference in what you're willing to pay. Because if someone has to do 2 weeks of research, you've got to pay for that. So anyways, I'll end with the last couple of stories. And then the way I do the appraisals at the end, well, I'll say that after the stories. A lot of times people have asked me, what's the most valuable book that you've ever handled, or what's the high, and again, I've mentioned Paul Revere letters, $1 million books, Audubon's in the tens of thousands of dollars. And so we've dealt with a lot of expensive and rare books. But probably the most valuable book that I actually still have is a copy done in the 70s, I think, it might be the 60s, of The Night Before Christmas. It's a nice illustrated copy. That copy of The Night Before Christmas, I read to my daughters from the time they were born every Christmas Eve, read to both daughters. And it even goes beyond that a little, because one of my daughters married a man from Texas, and although they live in Newton and they live in the area, a lot of times Christmas they go down to his family. So before FaceTime, I actually put it on YouTube and read it to YouTube so that on Christmas Eve, I could read it to her. Now we have a few grandchildren, so now we read it to them. Now, my other daughter, Christmas Eve is tricky because I have to look at the clock, and at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I have to get on FaceTime. She lives in Nairobi, so there's 8 hours difference. So to hit Christmas Eve, I read it but it's that exact copy, the same one, the same illustrations. I don't know whether my tone has changed a lot. And now my grandson in Africa, he was born in December something, I've read it to them. So that copy of The Night Before Christmas is more valuable to me than any of the other books, for sentimental reasons. Last story, though, is about Bibles, and the reason I like to finish about Bibles is Bibles are the most commonly printed book of all time, always have been, probably always will be. And we sometimes get 5 and 10 calls a week with people who have 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. In most cases, we have to say to them, if this is your family Bible, and it's been handed down generation to generation, sentimentally, it's priceless. Monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, if it's one of those big old Victorian Bibles with the beautiful leather, the clasp in mint condition, they can sell $100 to $300. They make great gifts for ministers, priests, divinity students, whatever. But break one binding, have one hinge go, they lose all that value. And like I said earlier, they have the family history, birth, death. Usually the Historical Society likes to do the title page, a copy of that page, but they don't want the whole thing. Now, it's always worth checking, because there are Bibles, the Gutenberg Bible in 1456, if you had one, it might be worth $100 million. But there are first Bibles printed in places, first in certain languages, first in certain religions, and so on. So it's always worth checking, but in generally they're not. I got called to a large old church in Boston, well over a 100-year-old church. And they wanted me in there. They had a huge library, and they wanted to just see if over the years they had accumulated any valuable books. I spent a day there. They actually had some nice books. It was fun. At the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? There were some more books. Went down the basement, looked at the more books. And then there was a closet, or it was more like a small room, maybe about where that comes out, and if you go over, maybe about a third of that area. Priest opened the store, floor to ceiling, front to back, top to bottom. It was stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I said, what is this? And he says, well, people feel they hate to throw away a book. They feel it's terrible to throw away a book. A Bible, they feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. And then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, it's great. But if not, you're really not doing anyone a favor. A couple of things. I have my card up here. If you like the stories, Brattlecast, it's on all the podcasts. But we've got about 100 episodes out. They're about 15, 20 minutes. Just story after story of me rambling on with the host. If you like them, listen, like it, whatever. And don't ever feel you're either getting in touch with me or the people I work with questions. We'd rather have 100 people call with nothing special than the 101st person say, I just threw away, and we go, oh, that was worth $1 million or something. So don't ever feel you're bothering us. The way I do the appraisals, though, I'm gonna end the formal part of the talk. People just crowd around. I'm not gonna, if you wanna listen over my shoulder, that's fine. But the less order there is to it, the faster it goes. I wanna get home. And if anyone has a stack of books and there are people behind you are waiting, I might only do 1 or 2 and then ask you to go to the end of the line. I'll do them all, but in any case. So, first of all, this is the largest group since COVID that has come out. It's really nice to see, and the Red Sox are playing Chicago, so I can listen on my way home. The Celtics played last night, so we're not losing anyone to them. So anyways, thank you very much. I'm going to turn the mic off and just bring things up. I'm going to put the mic over here so that I don't drop. Literally, if you have books, no, I don't need them. I'd rather. Is this the Bible?
Hello.
Like I said, just aside, if his papers are anywhere, in other words,
I
if
have
they-
logistics that he did for Washington's stuff.
well, if you have all that, that's what's valuable, not the signatures. Right, but if you have all of his papers, those are valuable.
No, I don't have this.
I thought you said you had all his logistics and.
No, I have some samples of
Well, wherever those samples are, whatever university that's in, get in touch with them. They might want his Bible. And probably, since it's an early Isaiah Thomas Bible, probably $500, something like that. But the actual just signed Bible is one thing. The logistics, the papers and all that is another thing.
Some years ago, I looked it up and found a student $47,000. So that's why
Well, call Sussex. They'll give you.
they'll give you a straight quote.
They'll give you a straight
Maybe you'll
answer.
see at the show.
Yeah, try them, but it's not.
So it's signed. I have a paperback one as well. I don't know. This is for the husband.
What?
This is to my husband. I can't use my husband.
I sent him photographs.
I wonder what signatures.
Well, they help at $1,500.
That's nice. More than I expected. This is by Teddy Roosevelt. It's not in great condition.
It's not a first edition, it's not an early edition, it's not. It's just a nice book.
Thank you. So I'm gonna.
This is the copy of the new edition. So it's $10, $20. The original would be worth thousands. It's interesting. 15, 25.
Decide which to bring. I brought, this is a book.
They're nice. They're not.
Thank you, I didn't think.
People like Albert Howard. But one of the things about Albert Howard's books, the reason they collect them is because of the beautiful printing. And unless it's in mint condition, so this would be about $10.
That just showed up on my door.
You all set?
Yeah, I know who Jay and I. He's the one who
It's nice, but the binding is
Right.
not. And it wouldn't be worth it. So, $10, $20.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get your card and send you a photograph of my bookshelf.
He
It's a nice reprint edition of it. It's a cheaper reprint, but not it's just for reading.
Okay.
And this is, it's a later edition. It's not in great shape. It's only volume 10.
Okay, thank you.
This is a nice book. It's not well collected. About a $50, $75 book.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Sign.
Signed. Frost signed a lot of his books, but usually $100, $200 for a nice sign. If it was one of it. Carl Sotheby's. Yeah, well, there's another volume to it. Oh. It's a book that shows up. The condition is okay. Someone had 110 pounds, which probably at the time was a few $100. It's about 100 in that range. It's about the same.
Thank you.
No worries.
One of the things about this book, well, first of all, the binding, but also it should have a map, and also it should have the pages on it. So it's actually an interesting book. So for reading, for research purposes, it's great, but monetarily. Not the condition is shot.
Oh, look at that.
There's a book dealer in Boston that specializes in miniatures. Yeah. And what I would probably do is, if you called, I'll give you their name. And
Is it start with a B?
Yes.
I think I found them online.
Yeah.
Maybe I should make a list and send it to them.
Or pictures would even be better. Yeah, it's Bromer, and that's what I'd suggest. I don't think any of these are tremendously valuable, but that's their expertise.
Right.
And one of the things is that I've learned is you don't have to know everything. You just have to know who to call if you do.
You'll just
And so I think this is probably the best one. And then the few leather ones, nice.
This is a Bible.
But I don't think it is huge. Well, that's a very nice one too. I think you're in some of these in the maybe.
No, just
There's a few hundreds of them, but they're experts. Call me if you want. I'll give you their name and number. If you've looked it up already, it is.
okay. I
Rome.
just want to show you this. This was my husband's book.
Oh.
I don't want to know about women.
There are lots of books like that.
How about that one, huh?
Yeah, it's a nice printed book. It's $25, $50. The Doré Bible Gallery is a reprint edition of it. It's about $50 to $100.
This one didn't make it in. It's from the 17th. And then it comes
It
the
does.
two volume.
It doesn't look. But send me the pictures, and then when I
That'd be
can put
awesome.
them.
Thank you.
But send them. We always respond within 2 business days. Put a phone number in. If you're waiting longer than 2 business days, call us. It would mean we didn't get it.
Okay.
So we're even if the response is, we got your email, it's going to take a while.
Yep.
We'll at least acknowledge that we got it. And if you don't get that acknowledgement, it means we didn't get the email.
Great. I'll
And
bring
put a
the
phone number.
manuscript next time. Thanks.
the condition isn't great, but
I know.
$100 to $200.
This condition is
slavery.
even worse because the cover's coming off, but the age of it is what is fascinating to me. Yeah. That was 1693. I just saw it.
Probably in the same range.
Okay.
Yeah, it's nice, and I'd have to really go through and see exactly what's in that one.
Okay.
But it definitely is interesting. This one is a book club edition.
Oh, it is.
There's no
Okay.
price.
All right.
And also the first edition says first edition. So it's a good book to read.
Okay.
And this one, on the copyright page, the Reinhardt has a symbol. They put an R on it. So again, they're both great reading, but not heavy.
Okay, thank you. I have two others. Should I go to the back of the line?
It just is.
My sister worked for Kamino Island for 20 years.
I have an
I didn't like
I can tell you a new story. I'll tell you. No, actually, it fits in with what you're saying. This one, the binding. The binding is beautiful. The binding, a couple of $100 at least, $250.
Did this come
Yeah,
colored like that
yeah,
already? Okay,
yeah.
it's not.
But what makes this particular is the bindings in
Yeah.
such good shape.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
So that's the main thing. It's just the binding.
Okay, thank you.
This is supposed to be the first edition of Kamino Island or Dickens.
Yeah. Now,
After the parts.
after the parts, but the thing is, when people are collecting Dickens now, they want it in the original binding, not in a leather rebinding.
I actually have only
But
two
it's a
things,
nice leather,
but it's a set.
right, but I'm just saying, but the collectors want the cloth the way it came out originally. But this is a very pretty binding. If this is actually one of those occasions, depending on where you bought it. If you went on Madison Avenue in New York around Christmas time to buy this, it'd probably be $500 to $700. If you went to a general use bookstore not paying $1 million a year rent, it would probably about $350.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the book fair? And,
Yeah.
I paid $25 for that.
Well, the,
I thought I did well.
yeah.
Just quickly, would you have interest in
I had a
these
neighbor,
two sets,
he knows wrapped his
Florence sets?
I'll tell you what, send me an email. The ophthalmology, probably not.
They moved down.
London, no.
Okay.
Neither one, no.
All right, thank you.
They're both nice, but not anything.
Hi, there's an inscribed book. I did a quick search of her, and she was an astrologer friend
Oh,
in the
okay.
late 40s, 50s, but nobody famous.
Yeah, like an original.
And this is one of those limited editions, but I don't know. I haven't seen many of them
Well,
online.
one of the problems with this is the limited editions club, 1,500 copies signed. I love the illustrated copy
Yeah,
of this,
yeah.
but they also came with a box.
I have the book.
Um,
It's not in correction, but I have it.
Well, people really care about the condition, and this is a little,
Yeah, right.
probably
Yes.
$50 to $100. If it was in perfect shape, $250, $300.
Okay.
But 50 would sell it quickly.
Yeah,
Anything beyond that, you get it.
right. Thank you.
This is a reprint. The originals are much bigger, done in France. Probably in the $50 to $100.
If the city allows us with that.
Big huge Bible, Bible
$50 to
dictionary.
$100.
I didn't realize it was a big.
Yeah, no, and it really affects. If you saw the bigger, earlier ones, the way the prints come through are much better.
Yeah. Yeah.
My wife,
No, this gentleman's next.
No. I was in my first.
All right, very quickly. This is not a box, it's one set of Shakespeare.
Well, that's a dictionary.
Yeah,
Okay,
this
the
is.
dictionary is, we put it out on a dollar table.
Okay.
It's maybe.
Okay, thank
And
you.
next to the Bible, the most common book in the English language is Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And again, these probably would go on a $1 or $3 tables.
Oh my God.
Because, I mean, it was first done in the 1600s. And so this is 19th century, early 20th century. And there's just millions and millions of
Okay.
shapes. And the condition isn't great.
So give it to a church or something like that.
A book sale or something.
Yeah, perfect. That's what I needed to know.
This is it, Ryan. There's a book I was looking for years.
Now,
Finally,
Lizzie, I wanna see.
Dartmouth found it on interlibrary loan for
Yeah.
me. But how do you value things like? And there are 500 copies printed in England.
Yeah.
So how do you figure out? I mean, I'm going to send it back to Iowa, where it came from. But with books like that, how do you value them?
I mean, some books are very rare.
Right.
But the people who want them are rarer.
Right.
So, you know, there has to be the supply and the demand.
Right.
So, you know, if you said to me, go out and find me a copy of that, we'd charge a lot of money for it, because the time it would take us to try to find one,
it.
that's what you're paying for.
Okay.
If we had one of those in the store, we might mark it $10 and just hope that somebody would buy it.
Right. And that's why I come to the store every time I'm in
Yeah.
Boston.
So that so
look on the shelf.
yes, and, you know, and some of the things like
Yeah, what else?
Hi.
these are really nicely. You know how I was saying in my bathroom we have books with really.
Uh-huh.
Now the ones I have usually a little bit better. Pride and Prejudice, though, Austin's very hot right now.
It
so
is,
so
but-
this might what?
My question is, so this is, I can find a lot of the London versions of these, but this is an American edition?
It doesn't make that much difference.
It doesn't, okay,
No,
that was my question.
and this would be $50 to $100 because it's a nice.
Oh, I found one online that sold for $4,500 like 3 weeks ago.
There's something not. I don't know what you saw online,
Oh, okay.
but it's not this edition of this book.
The Peacock edition?
This isn't the Peacock edition. This is Hugh Thompson, but no, the Peacock.
It says,
But there's something not. There's something not. That book's not worth $4,500. So I don't know what you saw, and I'd have to
Yeah.
see it to explain it.
yeah.
But something's not meshing. That's
Okay.
a $50 to $100
Okay.
book in that condition.
All right, thank you.
And if sometime you want to send me what you saw,
Yeah,
as opposed
there's a lot of them online.
at a lot of them at $4,500.
No, anywhere between, depending on the condition, between like 900 and 4,500.
Well, there's a reason, but if you send me that, but no, those books to actually sell them
Yeah.
is more like 100 or so.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And that's why maybe the ones you're seeing are still online.
Okay.
Thank you, that was so enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
My wife,
Oh, these people are
yeah,
ahead of me.
Oh,
yeah.
I see you every time I come to
Yeah.
the store, and at some point, I sent you photographs, and at some point, you'll come to look at my house, but you said I needed to pick out the ones I wanted to keep.
Yeah,
first.
because if you say, look at the library, and then you go,
Yeah.
almost everything's for sale, then we have to go, is that for sale, is that for sale, and it's impossible.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. Well, if I die first, my wife will have you come and take them all.
Worry about that after you die.
Yeah.
Then we'll talk. The Harry Potter,
So these are signed,
okay.
and they're only signed by her. Where is it?
Probably in the range of 100, 200 apiece.
Okay.
The only one that really gets big money is the first English. One of those sold for $470,000.
Wow.
Unsigned. But it's only that first one.
All righty,
So
great,
what-
thanks.